You know what separates someone who dreams big from someone who actually builds empires? It's not talent. It's not luck. And it's definitely not confidence, at least not the kind you think. Elon Musk didn't wake up one day feeling unstoppable. He's been booed off stages. He's watched rockets explode after years of work. He's been hours away from bankruptcy multiple times. And yet, here's what most people miss. He kept moving anyway. See, you've been lied to about confidence. You think you need to feel ready before you act. You think doubt means you're not cut out for it. But Musk operates from a completely different place. He doesn't wait for fear to disappear. He calculates the mission, accepts the terror, and moves forward anyway because the goal is bigger than his comfort. That's what this audiobook is about. Not becoming fearless, but becoming someone who acts despite the fear. Not waiting for permission, but giving it to yourself. Not hoping you'll feel confident someday, but building a mindset so relentless that your feelings become irrelevant. Because here's the truth. You already have everything you need. You just need to think like someone who refuses to stop. And that starts right now. You're standing at the edge of something big. Maybe it's a career shift. Maybe it's a business idea. Maybe it's just the decision to finally start that thing you've been thinking about for months. And here's what's stopping you. You don't feel ready yet. You're waiting for the fear to go away. You're waiting for some magical moment when confidence just appears. When you wake up one morning and finally feel like the kind of person who can do this. But here's the problem. That moment isn't coming. And Elon Musk figured this out a long time ago. When Musk decided to build SpaceX, he wasn't a rocket scientist. He had never built a rocket in his life. He had no formal training in aerospace engineering. And yet, he looked at the entire space industry. Decades of tradition, billions of dollars in infrastructure, literal rocket science, and thought, I can do this. Not because he felt confident, but because he asked a completely different question. He didn't ask, do I feel ready? He asked, what are the fundamental truths here? That's first principles thinking. And it's the reason Musk moves forward while most people stay stuck. See, most of us operate from assumptions. We inherit beliefs about what's possible, what's expensive, what's too hard, what requires permission. And we treat those beliefs like laws of physics. We don't question them. We just accept them. But Musk doesn't accept anything. He breaks everything down to the atomic level. He asks, what is actually fundamentally true? Not what do people say. Not what's traditional. Not what feels right. What is true? And when you strip away all the noise, all the inherited assumptions, all the emotional baggage, most of your fears collapse. Let me show you how this works. When Musk started SpaceX, rockets were incredibly expensive. Everyone in the industry agreed. Launching a rocket costs hundreds of millions of dollars. That was just the reality. That's what rockets cost. But Musk didn't accept that. He asked, what is a rocket made of? Aluminum alloys, titanium, copper, some electronics, fuel. He looked up the raw material costs. And you know what he found? The physical materials that make up a rocket. If you bought them by weight, cost maybe 2% of what rockets were being sold for. 2%. So the question shifted. It wasn't, can we afford to build rockets? It became, why is there a 50x markup between materials and final product? And suddenly, the entire problem changed. It wasn't about raising more money. It wasn't about feeling confident enough to compete with Boeing and Lockheed Martin. It was about redesigning the manufacturing process from scratch, building in-house, cutting out the markup. That's what first principles thinking does. It doesn't eliminate fear. It eliminates the false logic that makes fear feel justified. You see this pattern everywhere in Musk's life. When Tesla was struggling to scale production, everyone told him you couldn't build cars in California. Labor costs were too high. Regulations were too strict. The infrastructure wasn't there. And Musk said, what must be true to build a car? You need robots. You need precision manufacturing. You need vertical integration. He didn't argue with their feelings about California. He went to the fundamental truths and rebuilt the entire operation around those instead. And here's what matters for you. You can do this too. Right now, you're probably carrying a belief that feels like a wall. Maybe it's, I don't have enough experience. Maybe it's, I'm not the kind of person who does this. Maybe it's, this market is too crowded, or I missed my chance, or I need more money first. And that belief feels real. It feels like a fact. But it's not. It's an assumption. And assumptions crumble under scrutiny. So let's take one of yours apart right now. Think about the thing you want to do but don't feel ready for. Got it? Good. Now ask yourself, what are the fundamental truths here? Not the story you've been telling yourself. Not what people say. Not what feels hard. What is actually objectively true? Let's say you want to start a business, but you think you need $50,000 to get started. That's your wall. Okay, break it down. What is a business? Fundamentally, it's solving a problem someone will pay you for. That's it. Do you need $50,000 to solve a problem? Or is that what businesses in your category traditionally spend? See the difference? One is a fundamental truth. The other is inherited assumption. Or maybe you think you need a certain degree, a certain network, a certain amount of credibility before you can make the move you want to make. Okay. What is fundamentally required? Skill, knowledge, results? And can you acquire those without the traditional path everyone assumes is mandatory? Musk didn't wait for NASA to hand him a rocket program. He taught himself rocket science by reading textbooks. He hired people smarter than him. He tested, failed, adjusted. He didn't ask permission. He just identified what was actually necessary and went after it directly. And here's the shift that happens when you start thinking this way. Your emotions stop being the deciding factor. Most people negotiate with their feelings. They wait to feel confident. They wait to feel less scared. They wait for motivation to show up. And because feelings are unreliable, they stay stuck. But when you're operating from first principles, action becomes inevitable. Because you're not asking, how do I feel about this? You're asking, what is true and what is the logical next step? And once you see the logic clearly, there's nothing left to debate. Musk has been asked in interviews why he keeps pushing forward when things get brutal. When rockets explode, when production lines fail, when investors lose faith. And his answer is always some version of this. Because the physics make sense. Because the logic is sound. Because the path is clear, even if it's hard. He's not running on courage. He's running on certainty. Certainty that he's thought it through. Certainty that the reasoning holds. Certainty that if the fundamentals are right, the outcome is just a matter of execution and iteration. That's a completely different operating system than the one most people run. You've been taught to trust your gut, to follow your passion, to wait until it feels right. And all of that keeps you trapped. Because feelings change. Fear spikes. Doubt creeps in. And suddenly you're back at square one, waiting for some external force to make you feel ready. But first principles thinking bypasses all of that. It gives you a foundation that doesn't move. So when fear shows up, and it will, you're not derailed. You just acknowledge it and keep moving, because the logic hasn't changed. Here's a practical way to start using this today. Take whatever you're stuck on. Write down every reason you think you can't do it, every obstacle, every excuse. Get it all out. Now go through that list and ask, is this a fundamental truth, or is this an assumption? I don't have enough money. Assumption. The real question is, what is the minimum viable version of this that I could fund today? I don't have the right connections. Assumption. The real question is, what do I need to learn or build that makes connections irrelevant? I'm not qualified. Assumption. The real question is, what does qualified actually mean here, and can I acquire those specific skills without the traditional credential? Most of your obstacles aren't real. They're just inherited beliefs you've never challenged. And once you challenge them, they dissolve. Musk didn't feel ready to take on the automotive industry. He didn't feel ready to compete with NASA. He didn't feel ready to redesign how tunnels are built or how satellites provide internet. But he didn't need to feel ready. He just needed the fundamentals to hold up under pressure. And they did. So here's what I want you to walk away with. Confidence isn't something you find. It's something you build. And you build it by thinking clearly. You strip the problem down to what's actually true. You remove the assumptions. You identify the core logic. And then you act on that logic, not on how you feel. Because here's the truth Musk operates from every single day. If your reasoning is sound, your feelings are irrelevant. That doesn't mean the fear goes away. It just means the fear doesn't get to decide anymore. You've been waiting for permission, for the right moment, for confidence to arrive like some external gift. But it doesn't work that way. Confidence is the byproduct of clear thinking and forward motion. It's what happens after you start, not before. So stop asking if you feel ready. Start asking what's fundamentally true. Start asking what the shortest path forward actually is. Start asking what must be done, not what feels comfortable. And then, this is the part that changes everything. Start moving. Not because you're fearless, but because the logic is unshakable. And that's enough. Musk has blown up rockets. He's burned through millions in failed experiments. He's been mocked, doubted, dismissed. But he keeps going. Not because he's immune to fear, but because he's built a foundation that doesn't require emotional certainty to stay standing. You can build that same foundation. One question at a time. One assumption challenged. One fundamental truth identified. And once you see the path clearly, you won't need to wait for courage. You'll just go. Because in the next chapter, we're going to talk about what happens when you do start moving and the fear doesn't disappear. We're going to explore how Musk treats doubt, not as a stop sign, but as mission-critical data. How he calculates risk instead of avoiding it. How he quantifies fear instead of being paralyzed by it. But that only works if you've done the work here first. If you've stripped your problem down to its fundamentals. If you've identified what's actually true versus what you've just been assuming. So do that now. Take one thing you've been stuck on. Break it down. Find the fundamental truth underneath the fear. And then take the first logical step. Not the comfortable step. Not the easy step. The logical one. That's how someone who thinks like Elon Musk would move. And it's how you move forward too. You started moving. You asked the hard questions. You stripped away the assumptions. And now you're here, staring at the actual risk. And the doubt is louder than ever. Because here's what nobody tells you. Clarity doesn't eliminate fear. It just gives you a clearer view of what you're actually afraid of. And sometimes that makes it worse. You know what you need to do. You've done the first principles thinking. The logic is sound. But now your brain is screaming every worst-case scenario it can manufacture. The money you could lose. The reputation you could damage. The time you could waste. The humiliation if it all falls apart. And you're stuck again. Not because you don't know the path, but because you don't know if you can survive the fall. Elon Musk knows this feeling intimately. In 2008, both Tesla and SpaceX were dying. Tesla was months from bankruptcy. SpaceX had just watched its third rocket explode. Investors were pulling out. The press was writing obituaries. And Musk had a choice. Pour his remaining money into one company and let the other collapse, or split it between both and risk losing everything. Most people would call that paralyzing. Most people would freeze. But Musk didn't freeze. He calculated. He didn't suppress the fear. He didn't pretend the risk wasn't real. He didn't wait for courage to magically appear and tell him what to do. He quantified it. He ran the numbers. What's the probability SpaceX succeeds if I fund one more launch? What's the probability Tesla survives if I inject the last of my capital? What happens if both fail? What can I recover from? What's actually fatal versus just devastating? And once he had the data, he made the call. He split the money. He bet on both. Not because he was certain they'd survive, but because he'd calculated the acceptable loss and decided he could live with the worst-case outcome. That's what this chapter is about. Not eliminating doubt, but weaponizing it. Because here's what Musk understands that most people don't. Doubt isn't the enemy. Unprocessed doubt is. When fear is just this vague, consuming force. This formless anxiety that sits in your chest and whispers, "What if?" It controls you. It paralyzes you. It makes every risk feel existential. But when you break that fear down into variables, when you assign probabilities, identify failure modes, calculate recovery paths, it transforms. It stops being this overwhelming emotional force and becomes what it actually is: data. Information you can use. Let me show you how this works. Right now, you're probably afraid of something specific. A decision you need to make. A move you need to commit to, and your brain is feeding you nightmare scenarios on repeat. But here's the question Musk would ask. What's the actual probability of that happening? Not, could it happen? Not, it feels likely. What is the real, honest percentage chance that your worst fear actually materializes? Most people never ask this. They just let the fear exist as this infinite possibility. And anything that's possible feels inevitable when you're scared. But Musk doesn't operate that way. When SpaceX was bleeding money and rockets were exploding, he didn't just feel the fear of total failure, he calculated it. What's the probability the next launch succeeds? Based on what we learned from the last failure, based on the engineering changes we've made, based on the data we have, what's the real number? And sometimes the number was brutal. Sometimes it was 30%. Sometimes lower. But here's the shift. Once you have a number, you have control. Because now it's not, this might destroy everything. It's there's a 30% chance of success and a 70% chance of failure. And I need to decide if those odds are worth the cost of the attempt. That's a completely different calculation than the shapeless dread you were carrying before. And suddenly, you can make a decision. Not based on how you feel, but based on whether the potential upside justifies the quantified risk. When Musk decided to move forward with Starship, the fully reusable rocket system that seemed impossible to most of the aerospace industry, he didn't do it because he was certain it would work. He did it because he calculated the odds, evaluated what failure would cost, and determined that even a 20% chance of success was worth the investment. Because the upside, cheap, reusable access to space, was so asymmetrically valuable that even low probability was worth high risk. That's not recklessness. That's engineering. So let's do this with your fear right now. Whatever you're afraid of, write it down. The worst case scenario. Get specific. Not it could go badly. What exactly happens if this fails? You lose money? How much specifically? You damage your reputation. With whom and how permanently? You waste time. How much time? And what else could you have done with it instead? Get concrete. Because vague fears are infinite. Specific fears are measurable. Now ask, what's the actual probability of this worst case happening? And be honest. Not pessimistic. Not optimistic. If you had to bet money on it, what percentage would you assign? Let's say you're starting a business and you're afraid it fails and you lose your investment. Okay. What percentage of new businesses in your category fail in the first year? That's not your feeling. That's a statistic you can look up. Let's say it's 60%. So you've got a 40% chance of making it past year one. Now you know what you're working with. Next question. Can you survive the loss? This is critical. Because Musk doesn't take risks that are truly fatal. He takes risks that are survivable. Painful, yes. Devastating, maybe. But survivable. In 2008, when he split his money between Tesla and SpaceX, he knew that if both failed, he'd be financially ruined. But he also knew he wouldn't be dead. He wouldn't be incapable of rebuilding. It would hurt. It would be humiliating. But it wouldn't be permanent. That's the line. Fatal versus recoverable. So ask yourself, if this worst-case scenario happens, what does recovery look like? If you lose the money, can you earn it back? If you damage the relationship, can you repair it or find others? If you waste a year, are you actually behind, or did you just learn something expensive? Most of the time. Not always, but most of the time. The answer is, you can recover. And once you know you can survive the fall, the fear loses its power. Because now it's not, this could destroy me. It's, this could set me back. And I've calculated how far. And I've decided the potential gain is worth the quantified setback. Musk has been set back repeatedly. Spectacularly. Publicly. And every time, he's calculated whether he can recover. And every time, the answer has been yes. So he keeps moving. Not because he's fearless, but because he's run the numbers. And the numbers say he can survive this. Here's where most people get stuck, though. They want certainty. They want a guarantee that if they take the risk, it'll work out. And because they can't get that guarantee, they don't move. But Musk operates from a completely different framework. He doesn't demand certainty. He makes peace with calculated risk. There's a concept in engineering called acceptable failure rate. It's the acknowledgement that nothing is 100% reliable. Rockets fail. Prototypes break. Systems crash. And that's not a reason to stop building. It's just a variable you account for. Musk applies this to everything. When he launches a rocket, he knows there's a percentage chance it explodes. When he releases a new Tesla feature, he knows there's a percentage chance it has bugs. When he makes a public statement, he knows there's a percentage chance it backfires. But he doesn't wait for zero risk. He calculates the acceptable failure rate and moves forward anyway. That's the mindset shift you need to make. You're never going to have certainty. You're never going to eliminate risk. You're never going to reach a point where doubt disappears and you just know it'll all work out. But you don't need that. You just need to know the odds. And you need to decide if those odds are worth taking. When SpaceX was preparing for its fourth launch, the one that would determine whether the company survived or collapsed entirely, Musk didn't have certainty. He had data from 3 failed attempts. He had engineering improvements. He had a calculated probability of success. And he launched anyway, because the alternative, giving up, walking away, accepting defeat, had a 100% chance of failure, and even a 40% chance of success was better than guaranteed collapse. That's the calculation. That's the frame. So here's what I want you to do right now. Take the thing you're afraid of. Run the numbers. Assign a percentage to your worst-case scenario. Be honest, not dramatic. Calculate what failure actually costs. Financially, emotionally, in terms of time. Get specific. Determine if you can recover from that cost. Not easily. Not painlessly. But can you? And then, this is the part that changes everything. Compare that quantified risk to the cost of not trying. Because inaction has a cost too. It's just a hidden one. If you don't take this risk, where are you in a year? In 5 years? What's the probability you'll regret not moving? What's the cost of staying stuck? Musk asks this constantly. What's the cost of not building reusable rockets? Humanity stays stuck on Earth. What's the cost of not accelerating electric vehicles? Climate change continues unchecked. What's the cost of not attempting this? And when the cost of inaction exceeds the calculated risk of action, the decision becomes obvious. You move, not because you're certain, but because you've done the math, and the math says this is the logical choice. That's what it means to think like Musk. You don't ignore doubt. You don't suppress fear. You don't wait for it to go away. You convert it into data. You quantify it. You calculate it. And then you make a decision based on probability, not emotion. Here's the beautiful part. Once you start doing this, fear stops being this paralyzing force. It becomes information, useful, mission-critical information. When doubt shows up, you don't panic. You ask, what is this telling me? What variable am I not accounting for? What failure mode am I worried about? And then you address it. You adjust the plan. You mitigate the risk. You calculate the new probability. But you don't stop. Musk has been asked how he keeps going when the odds are against him. And his answer is always some version of this. I know the probabilities. I've run the scenarios. I've calculated what failure costs and what success enables. And based on that data, moving forward is the only logical choice. That's not bravery. That's math. And you can do math. So stop letting doubt control you. Stop treating fear like this mysterious force you have to conquer. Start treating it like the data it actually is. Quantify it. Calculate it. Assign percentages. Map failure modes. Determine recovery paths. And then make your decision based on the numbers, not the noise. Because in the next chapter, we're going to talk about what happens when you make that decision and start building in public. When you launch before you're perfect. When you expose your work to the world while it's still flawed, still incomplete, still risky. We're going to explore why Musk operates in public failure mode, why he shows the explosions, announces the timelines, commits before he's figured it out, and why that terrifying strategy is actually the fastest path to success. But you can only do that if you've done the work here. If you've stopped treating doubt as destiny and started treating it as data. So do that now. Run the numbers on your fear. Calculate the real risk. Determine if you can survive the fall. And then make the call. Not based on how you feel. Based on what the data says. That's how someone who thinks like Elon Musk moves through doubt. And it's how you move forward too. You've done the math. You've calculated the risk. You know the odds. And now you're ready to move. Except you're not ready. Are you? Because the work isn't finished yet. The product isn't polished. The plan has gaps. And you're thinking, I need a little more time. Just a few more weeks to get this right. To make sure it's perfect before anyone sees it. And here's the trap you're walking into. You think privacy protects you. You think if you can just perfect this thing in secret, away from judgment, away from criticism, you'll launch when it's ready and avoid all the embarrassment of being seen while you're still figuring it out. But Elon Musk learned a long time ago that privacy doesn't protect you. It kills you. December 2020. Starship SN8. SpaceX's massive experimental rocket prototype. launched in front of thousands of people. Live cameras everywhere, the whole world watching. And 6 minutes into the flight, during landing, it slammed into the ground and exploded in a fireball. Complete destruction. Total failure. Broadcast globally. And Musk's response. He tweeted, "Fuel header tank pressure was low during landing burn, causing touchdown velocity to be high. We got all the data we needed. Congrats, SpaceX team." No apology. No shame. No hiding. Because to Musk, that wasn't failure. That was progress. Visible, measurable, public progress. And that's the mindset shift you need to make if you're ever going to build anything that matters. Most people wait until something's perfect before they show it to the world. They work in private. They polish in secret. They protect their reputation by never exposing anything that isn't already flawless. And they stay stuck forever. Because here's what perfectionism actually is. It's fear wearing a professional mask. You tell yourself you're being responsible, strategic, smart. You're just making sure it's ready. But what you're really doing is avoiding the terror of being seen before you're certain you'll be applauded. And Musk doesn't operate that way. He operates in public failure mode. He announces timelines he hasn't solved. He demonstrates technology that's barely functional. He launches products with bugs still in the code. And when things break, and they do break spectacularly repeatedly, he does it in front of everyone. Not because he's reckless, but because he understands something most people don't. Public accountability accelerates progress faster than private preparation ever could. Let me show you why. When you work in private, you're accountable to yourself. And yourself is very forgiving. Yourself will let you push deadlines. Yourself will accept good enough for now. Yourself will let you avoid the hard problems because no one's watching. But when you work in public, the entire equation changes. Suddenly, you've made promises. You've set expectations. You've put your name on something that isn't finished yet. And now you have to deliver. That pressure, that external public pressure, forces you into solutions you'd never find on your own. When Musk announced in 2016 that Tesla would have full self-driving capability within 2 years, the technology didn't exist yet. The neural networks weren't trained. The hardware wasn't ready. And every expert in the industry said it was impossible on that timeline. But Musk said it publicly anyway. And that public commitment created a forcing function. It mobilized teams. It focused resources. It eliminated the option to procrastinate or settle for incremental progress. Did they hit the timeline? No. Not even close. But did they make progress they never would have made without that public pressure? Absolutely. That's what public failure mode does. It removes your safety net. And without a safety net, you move faster, think sharper, and solve harder problems than you ever would in the comfort of privacy. Now, I know what you're thinking. But what about my reputation? What if people see me fail? What if I look incompetent? And here's the truth. They will see you fail. You will look incompetent, at least temporarily. SpaceX has blown up more rockets in public than most companies even attempt in private. Tesla has released software updates with embarrassing bugs. Musk himself has made wild predictions that didn't come true, launched features that didn't work, promised timelines that collapsed. And none of that destroyed him. Because here's what happens when you operate in public failure mode. People stop expecting perfection. They start expecting progress. When SpaceX's rockets explode, the world doesn't mock them. They watch with anticipation to see what comes next. Because Musk has conditioned everyone to understand. This is how iteration works. This is what building in public looks like. Failure isn't the exception. It's the process. And once you internalize that, once you stop treating imperfection as something to hide, you unlock a completely different speed of execution. So let's talk about what this actually looks like for you. Right now, you're probably sitting on something. A project, an idea, a piece of work that's 70% done. And you're thinking, I just need to get it to 90% before I can show anyone. But here's what Musk would ask. What are you learning by keeping it private? Because the gap between 70% and 90% isn't about quality. It's about fear. You're not improving the work. You're protecting yourself from judgment. And every day you spend polishing in private is a day you're not getting real feedback. Real users, real data, real pressure that would force you to solve the actual problems instead of the imagined ones. When Tesla launched the Model S, it had issues. Range anxiety was real. Charging infrastructure barely existed. The software had bugs. But Musk didn't wait until every problem was solved. He launched at 70%. And then he used the public response. the complaints, the confusion, the real-world failures, to guide every iteration after that. If he'd waited until it was perfect, the Model S still wouldn't exist. Because perfection is a moving target. The market changes. Technology evolves. What's perfect today is obsolete tomorrow. But 70% launched is better than 100% in stealth, every single time. So here's your first move. Launch something this week. Not the big thing, not the final version, just something. A prototype, a draft, a minimal viable version of the idea you've been hoarding, and make it public. Put your name on it. Let people see it. Let them react to it. Will it be flawed? Yes. Will some people criticize it? Absolutely. Will you feel exposed and vulnerable? Without question. But here's what else will happen. You'll get feedback you never could have generated on your own. You'll see how real people interact with your work. You'll discover problems you didn't know existed. And you'll be forced to improve it faster than you ever would in isolation. That's the accelerant. That's what public failure mode unlocks. Musk has said in interviews that one of SpaceX's biggest advantages is that they test in public. When a rocket explodes, the whole world sees it. And that visibility creates urgency. It creates accountability. It forces rapid iteration because there's no hiding from the results. If they tested in secret, they could rationalize delays. They could avoid the hard pivots. They could stay comfortable. But comfort doesn't build rockets. Pressure does. And you need to apply that same principle to whatever you're building. Here's the mindset shift. Stop thinking of your work as something that needs to be protected until it's worthy. Start thinking of it as something that needs to be exposed so it can evolve. Your version 1.0 is supposed to be embarrassing. That's not a flaw in your process. That's the process working correctly. Musk's first Roadster prototype was basically a modified Lotus with a battery. It was crude. It was limited. It wasn't the vision, but it was real. And it was public. And that public exposure forced the next version to be better. You see this pattern everywhere in his companies. Release early. Fail visibly. Iterate publicly. Let the world see the messy middle. Because the alternative, perfecting in private, isn't safer. It's just slower. And slower kills more dreams than failure ever will. Now here's the part that makes this hard. Public failure requires letting go of your ego. You have to be willing to look incompetent temporarily. You have to be willing to be wrong publicly. You have to be willing to have people doubt you, criticize you, dismiss you. And that's terrifying. Because your ego wants to be right. It wants to be impressive. It wants to only be seen when you're at your best. But Musk operates from a completely different identity. He's not attached to being right. He's attached to the mission. And the mission doesn't care about his ego. When Cybertruck's windows shattered during the live reveal, Musk didn't cancel the event. He didn't pull the product. He laughed, acknowledged the failure, and kept going. Because the mission, getting an electric truck to market, mattered more than looking polished in that moment. That's the trade. You can protect your ego or you can build your mission. You can't do both. So which one matters more to you? If your answer is the mission, then you need to start operating like Musk. You need to expose your work early. You need to launch before it's perfect. You need to let public pressure force you into solutions you'd never reach in private. Here's a practical framework. The 70% rule. Whatever you're working on, identify the point where it's 70% functional. Not perfect, not polished. Just functional enough to deliver some version of the value you're promising. And then launch it. Put it in front of real people. Get real feedback. See what breaks. See what works. See what you got wrong. And then, this is critical. Iterate publicly. Don't disappear to fix it in secret. Fix it in public. Show the progress. Show the improvements. Let people see that you're listening, adapting, evolving. That transparency builds trust far more than perfection ever could. When Tesla pushes over-the-air software updates, customers see the car improving in real time. They see bugs getting fixed. They see features getting added. They see the iteration happening. Instead of feeling like they bought an incomplete product, they feel like they're part of the development process. They're invested. They're watching it evolve. That only works because Musk is willing to launch incomplete and improve publicly. You can do the same thing. With your business, with your content, with your creative work. Whatever it is, stop waiting for permission to be seen. Launch at 70%. Improve in public. Let the visibility create the pressure that forces you to level up faster than privacy ever could. And here's what you'll discover. The fear of being judged is always worse than the actual judgment, because most people aren't watching that closely. And the ones who are, they're either rooting for you or irrelevant. The critics will always be there. They criticized Musk when Tesla was failing. They criticized him when SpaceX was exploding rockets. They'll criticize you too. But criticism doesn't kill companies. Hiding does. So let them watch. Let them judge. Let them doubt. And while they're talking, you'll be iterating. You'll be improving. You'll be moving faster than anyone who's still polishing in private. Because here's the final truth about public failure mode. It's the only way to build anything that matters at the speed the world actually moves. The market doesn't wait for you to feel ready. Technology doesn't pause while you perfect your approach. Opportunities don't hold still while you polish in secret. If you want to build something real, you have to be willing to be seen while you're building it. Flaws and all. That's how Musk operates. That's how he's built multiple billion-dollar companies while everyone else is still preparing to launch. And that's how you move forward too. So stop hiding. Stop protecting. Stop protecting your ego from the judgment you're imagining. Launch at 70%. Fail in public. Iterate faster than anyone can criticize you. And in the next chapter, we're going to talk about what happens when you do this and the world starts watching. When the pressure intensifies. When people start having opinions about your work, your timelines, your decisions. We're going to explore how Musk deletes the need for approval entirely. How he builds conviction so dense that external opinions don't reach him. How he manufactures his own gravity instead of orbiting everyone else's. But that only works if you've started operating in public. If you've exposed your work. If you've made yourself visible, so do that now. Take the thing you've been perfecting in private. The thing that's 70% done. The thing you're afraid to show, and launch it. Not next month. Not when it's ready. This week. Put it out there. Let people see it. Let the world react. And then use that reaction, the feedback, the criticism, the pressure, to make it better faster than you ever could alone. That's how someone who thinks like Elon Musk builds. And it's how you build too. You launched. You put your work out there. You let the world see it before it was perfect. And now, they're talking. Some people are excited. Some are skeptical. Some think you're moving too fast. Some think you're not credible. Some are waiting for you to fail so they can say they knew it all along. And here's the problem. You care what they think. You check the comments. You track the reactions. You measure your progress by how people respond to it. And every time someone doubts you, every time someone criticizes, every time someone doesn't believe, it shakes you. Because deep down, you're still looking for permission. You're still waiting for the world to validate that you're on the right path. And that's going to kill your momentum if you don't fix it right now. Elon Musk learned this lesson the hard way. 2008. Tesla is burning cash. SpaceX has failed 3 launches in a row. The media is writing articles about his inevitable collapse. Investors are pulling out. Industry veterans are calling him delusional. And the entire automotive and aerospace establishment is watching, waiting for him to admit defeat and go back to whatever lane they think he belongs in. And Musk just kept building. Not because people believed in him, but because he'd stopped needing them to. Somewhere along the way, Musk figured out something most people never learn. Other people's opinions are not navigational data. They're atmospheric noise. And if you let that noise determine your direction, you'll spend your entire life orbiting other people's belief systems instead of building your own. That's what this chapter is about. Learning to generate your own gravity. Building conviction so dense, so self-sustaining, that external validation becomes irrelevant. Because, here's the truth. As long as you need approval, you're not really in control. You think you're making decisions. But you're not. You're predicting what will get applause and then doing that. You're measuring success by how people react instead of by what you actually accomplish. You're letting the crowd determine what's possible instead of proving it yourself. And that's not leadership. That's performance. Musk doesn't perform. He builds. And there's a massive difference. When Tesla announced the Cybertruck, the internet exploded. Some people loved it. Most people hated it. Design experts called it ugly. Automotive journalists said it would never sell. The reactions were brutal, loud, and immediate. And Musk's response? He took hundreds of thousands of pre-orders and kept building. Because he wasn't asking for the world's permission. He was anchored to a different question entirely. Does this advance the mission? Not will people like this? Not will this make me look good? Not will the critics approve? Just, does this move us towards sustainable transportation? If the answer is yes, the opinion of the crowd becomes irrelevant. That's manufactured gravity. That's what it looks like when your mission generates its own pull, so strong that you stop orbiting everyone else's judgments. And you can build this same gravity. But first, you have to understand what's been holding you captive. Right now, there's an invisible tether between your actions and other people's reactions. You do something, and then you wait to see how people respond before you decide if it was worth doing. If they approve, you feel validated. If they criticize, you question yourself. If they ignore you, you wonder if you matter. Your sense of progress, your sense of worth, your sense of direction, it's all tied to external feedback. And that makes you weak, not because you're a weak person, but because you've given your power away. You've outsourced your conviction to people who don't understand your mission, don't share your vision, and don't have to live with the consequences of your decisions. Musk stopped doing that years ago, when SpaceX was attempting to land rockets vertically, something no one had done successfully at scale. The entire aerospace industry said it was a waste of money. They said it was unnecessary. They said Musk was chasing spectacle instead of focusing on what actually mattered. And Musk kept landing rockets because he wasn't anchored to their approval. He was anchored to the mission. Make space travel affordable and reusable. And if reusable rockets were the path, then the opinions of people invested in the old system were just noise. Atmospheric noise. Here's the mindset shift you need to make. Criticism is not data. People will always have opinions. They'll tell you you're going too fast or too slow, that your idea won't work, that you're not qualified, that you're doing it wrong. And all of that might feel like information. It might feel like something you need to consider, process, integrate. But most of the time, it's just people projecting their own fears onto your journey. When someone tells you your idea won't work, what they're really saying is, I wouldn't take that risk. When they say you're not ready, what they mean is, I wouldn't feel ready. When they doubt your ability to pull it off, they're revealing their own limitations, not yours. Musk has been told he's not a real engineer, that he doesn't understand manufacturing, that he's overpromising, that his timelines are delusional. And every single one of those criticisms has come from people who haven't built what he's built. So why would he let their doubts determine his direction? He wouldn't. And neither should you. Now, I'm not saying ignore all feedback. There's a difference between criticism and data. Data comes from results, from testing, from users interacting with your product, from the market responding to your offer. That's real. That's actionable. That tells you what's working and what needs to change. But opinions? Opinions from people who aren't in the arena. Those are just noise. And you have to learn to filter them out. Here's how you start. Anchor your identity to mission outcomes, not social feedback. Right now, when you think about success, what do you picture? Be honest. Is it applause? Recognition? People saying, I always believed in you? Validation that you were right all along? If that's what success looks like to you, you're in trouble. Because you're chasing a moving target. You're building your worth on something you can't control. Musk doesn't measure success by whether people believe in him. He measures it by whether the rocket lands, whether the car ships, whether the mission advances. Those are outcomes he can control. Outcomes that don't fluctuate based on public opinion. And once you anchor to outcomes instead of approval, everything changes. You stop checking the comments obsessively. You stop needing everyone to understand. You stop waiting for permission. You just build. And you let the results speak. When Tesla was ramping up Model 3 production, Musk was sleeping on the factory floor. The media was calling it a disaster. Analysts were predicting bankruptcy. Everyone had an opinion about what he was doing wrong, and Musk just kept optimizing the production line. Because the mission wasn't convince analysts were viable. The mission was get affordable electric cars to customers at scale. So he ignored the noise and focused on the outcome. And eventually, Tesla hit production targets. The stock soared. The critics went quiet. But here's the key. Even if they hadn't gone quiet, even if the criticism had continued, it wouldn't have mattered. Because Musk's conviction wasn't built on their approval. It was built on repeated proof. That's the second piece of manufactured gravity. You build conviction through evidence, not permission. Every time you take action and survive, you collect proof. Proof that you can handle pressure. proof that you can solve problems, proof that you're capable of more than you thought. And that proof compounds. It builds a foundation of self-trust that external opinions can't shake. Musk has launched rockets that exploded. He's released products that flopped. He's made predictions that didn't come true. And every single time he's proven to himself that he can recover. That failure isn't fatal. That he can iterate, adapt, rebuild. And that repeated evidence has created unshakable conviction. He doesn't need you to believe Tesla will succeed. He's already proven to himself, over and over, that he can navigate uncertainty and come out the other side. You need to build that same proof for yourself. Every time you launch something and survive the criticism, that's proof. Every time you take a risk and recover from the failure, that's proof. Every time you keep going when people doubt you, that's proof. And the more proof you accumulate, the less you need external validation. Because your conviction isn't based on what people say anymore. It's based on what you've already done. So here's your action step. Stop asking for belief. Start collecting proof. Whatever you're building, stop waiting for people to get on board. Stop trying to convince the skeptics. Stop managing perceptions. Just move. Execute. Build. Ship. And every time you do, you're reinforcing to yourself that you don't need their approval to make progress. That's how you sever the tether. That's how you stop orbiting other people's opinions and start generating your own gravity. Now, here's where this gets hard. Because cutting the tether means accepting loneliness. When Musk decided to pursue reusable rockets, he was alone in that belief. The entire aerospace industry thought it was a bad idea. His own engineers were skeptical. And for years, while he was iterating, failing, exploding rockets, he was out there by himself. No one was validating his direction. No one was cheering him on. He had to generate his own certainty day after day in the face of widespread doubt. That's the cost of manufactured gravity. You have to be willing to be alone in your conviction until the results prove you right. And most people can't do that. They need the crowd. They need reassurance. They need someone to tell them they're on the right path. But if you need that, you'll never build anything truly original. Because original ideas, by definition, don't have consensus. They don't have proof yet. They don't have believers. They just have you. And the question is that enough? For Musk, it has to be. Because the missions he's pursuing, colonizing Mars, transitioning Earth to sustainable energy, merging human consciousness with AI, those aren't popular ideas. They're not safe bets. They're not things the crowd is going to validate early, so he can't wait for approval. He has to generate his own, and you need to do the same thing. Whatever your mission is, you need to decide right now. Is this important enough to pursue even if no one else believes in it? Because if the answer is no, if you need external validation to keep going, then you're not anchored to the mission. You're anchored to approval. And approval is a terrible foundation. But if the answer is yes, if the mission itself is enough, then you're free. Free to move without permission. Free to build without applause. Free to fail publicly and keep going anyway. That's manufactured gravity. That's what it feels like when you stop orbiting other people's opinions and start generating your own pull. Here's a practical framework, the conviction test. Before you make a decision, ask yourself, am I doing this because it advances the mission or because I think it'll get approval? If it's the latter, pause, reevaluate. Because decisions made for approval always disappoint. Even if people applaud, it won't feel like enough. Because you're chasing external validation, and that's a void you can never fill. But if you're doing it for the mission, move forward. Regardless of what people think. Regardless of whether they understand. Regardless of whether they approve. Just advance the mission. That's how Musk operates. Every decision, every announcement, every bold move, it's filtered through that single question. Does this advance the mission? If yes, he moves. If no, he doesn't. The crowd's opinion doesn't factor in. And that clarity, that singular focus, that's what creates unstoppable momentum. Because when you're not distracted by managing perceptions, when you're not exhausting yourself trying to convince skeptics, when you're not paralyzed by the fear of judgment, you move faster. You think clearer. You build better. You stop performing and start executing. So here's what I want you to do right now. Identify the opinion that's been holding you back. Whose approval are you waiting for? Whose doubt is making you hesitate? Whose judgment are you afraid of? Get specific. Name it. And then ask yourself, does their approval change the mission? Does their belief make the goal more achievable? Does their validation actually matter to the outcome? Most of the time, the answer is no. Their approval is atmospheric noise. It feels significant, but it doesn't change the trajectory. So stop letting it control you. Cut the tether. Generate your own gravity. Build conviction through proof, not permission. And in the next chapter, we're going to take this even further. We're going to talk about what happens when you stop chasing perfection and start optimizing for iteration speed. We're going to explore why Musk treats every version as temporary, why he builds, breaks, learns, and rebuilds faster than anyone else, why iteration beats preparation every single time. But you can only move at that speed if you've done the work here, if you've severed the connection between your progress and other people's approval. So do that now. Stop asking if people believe in you. Start building until belief becomes irrelevant. That's how someone who thinks like Elon Musk operates. And it's how you move forward too. You stopped waiting for approval. You built your own gravity. You anchored to the mission instead of the crowd. And now you're moving. You've got momentum. You've got conviction. But there's a new problem. You're moving too slow. Not because you're lazy. Not because you're uncommitted. But because you're still trying to get it right the first time. You're designing. You're planning. You're modeling every scenario. You're trying to anticipate every problem before you build. And you think that's smart. You think that's responsible. But Elon Musk would tell you that's the most expensive mistake you can make. Because while you're perfecting version 1 in your head, the world is moving. Technology is evolving. The market is shifting. And by the time you finally launch your perfect solution, it's already obsolete. Musk learned this early, and it changed everything. When SpaceX started developing Starship, they didn't spend 5 years engineering the perfect design. They built a prototype, a crude, untested version made of stainless steel. And they blew it up. Then they built another one, blew that up too, and another, and another. In the time traditional aerospace companies were still holding design review meetings, SpaceX had built and destroyed more than a dozen prototypes, each one teaching them something the simulations never could. Each failure compressing years of theoretical learning into weeks of real-world data. That's the rapid prototype mentality. And it's the reason Musk moves faster than everyone else. Most people think mastery is about getting it right once, about studying long enough, planning carefully enough, preparing thoroughly enough that when you finally execute, it's perfect. But Musk operates from a completely different framework. Mastery isn't about getting it right once. It's about getting it wrong faster than anyone else. Because every failure is data. And the faster you fail, the faster you learn. And the faster you learn, the faster you improve. But here's the problem. Your brain hates this approach. Your brain wants certainty. It wants to know that when you invest time, energy, money into something, it's going to work. It wants guarantees. It wants the right answer before you commit. And that need for certainty is killing your speed. Because certainty doesn't come from planning. It comes from testing. And you can't test without building. And you can't build without accepting that version 1 is going to be flawed. Musk has said this explicitly in interviews. If you're not embarrassed by your first version, you launch too late. Think about that. Embarrassed, not proud, not confident. Embarrassed. Because if you waited until you felt proud of it, you wasted months, maybe years, perfecting something that could have been tested, broken, and improved in a fraction of that time. Tesla's first Roadster? Embarrassing compared to what came after. SpaceX's first Falcon 1? Barely functional. Starlink's initial satellites? Crude prototypes compared to the current generation. But every single one of those embarrassing first versions taught Musk something he couldn't have learned any other way. And that knowledge became the foundation for everything that came next. So here's the shift you need to make. Stop treating every version like it's supposed to be the final answer. Start treating it like a test, a temporary solution, an experiment, a way to generate data you can't get from planning. When you think of your work as a test, the pressure changes completely. Because tests are allowed to fail. Tests are supposed to reveal what doesn't work. That's literally the point. But when you think of your work as the final product, failure feels catastrophic. It feels like proof you weren't ready, like evidence you should have waited longer. And that fear keeps you stuck in planning mode forever. Musk doesn't have that fear, not because he's fearless, but because he's redefined what failure means. To him, a rocket exploding isn't failure. It's expensive education. It's the fastest way to discover what needs to change. And as long as he's learning faster than he's burning resources, he's winning. That mindset, treating destruction as discovery, is what allows him to move at inhuman speed. While competitors are simulating, he's testing. While they're planning, he's iterating. While they're avoiding mistakes, he's making them deliberately, extracting the lessons and moving on. And the gap between those two approaches, it compounds exponentially. Let me show you what this looks like in practice. When SpaceX was trying to perfect rocket landings, they could have spent years in simulation. They could have modeled every variable, every atmospheric condition, every failure mode. And they did some of that. But Musk didn't wait for the simulations to guarantee success. He started launching real rockets and trying to land them. And they crashed. Spectacularly. Publicly. But each crash gave them data the simulations couldn't provide. Real-world physics. Real-time variables. Real failure modes they hadn't anticipated. And within months, they'd compressed a decade of theoretical learning into actual, actionable knowledge. That's what speed does. It collapses learning cycles. Instead of spending a year planning and then testing once, you spend a week building and then test 10 times. Same time investment. 10 times the data. And here's what happens. By the time your competitor finishes their perfect first version, you're already on version 12. You failed 11 times. You've learned 11 lessons. And your 12th attempt is better than their first will ever be. That's not luck. That's iteration speed. So how do you actually implement this? How do you move from perfectionist to rapid prototyper? First, compress your build cycles. Right now, you're probably thinking in months. I'll spend 3 months building this, then I'll launch. Musk thinks in weeks, sometimes days. When Tesla was ramping Cybertruck production, they weren't spending months perfecting each manufacturing process. They were making changes daily, testing, breaking, fixing, iterating. Because in manufacturing, every day you're not testing is a day you're not learning. And learning is the only thing that matters. So take whatever timeline you're working with and cut it in half, then cut it in half again. Not because you're rushing, but because you're forcing yourself to identify what's actually essential versus what's just polish. Version 1 doesn't need to be beautiful. It needs to be functional enough to test. That's it. When Musk unveils a new product, it's often rough. The Cybertruck reveal had broken windows. Early Teslas had panel gaps. First-generation Starlink satellites were heavier and less efficient than later versions. But they worked well enough to generate feedback. And that feedback drove the next iteration. You need to adopt that same standard, functional enough to test, not perfect, not polished, just functional. And here's the second piece. Treat every version as temporary. This is psychological, but it's critical. If you think of what you're building as permanent, you'll overinvest in making it perfect. You'll add features you don't need yet. You'll polish details that don't matter. You'll protect it from failure. But if you know, truly know, that this version is temporary, that you're going to destroy it and build a better one, you stop overinvesting. You build the minimum viable version. You test it. You learn what breaks. And you move on. Musk does this constantly. SpaceX doesn't build rockets to last forever. They build them to test specific hypotheses. And once they've extracted the learning, they move to the next design. That's why they can iterate so fast. They're not emotionally attached to any single version. And you need to develop that same detachment. Whatever you're building right now, it's not the final version. It's a test. And tests are meant to be destroyed, analyzed, and replaced. Now, here's where this gets uncomfortable. Rapid iteration means rapid failure. You're going to launch things that don't work. You're going to build features that users hate. You're going to make decisions that turn out to be wrong. And all of that is going to happen publicly, visibly, in real time. Most people can't handle that. They'd rather fail once privately after careful planning than fail 10 times publicly while iterating. But Musk has proven that public iteration beats private perfection every single time. Because when you iterate publicly, you're getting real feedback from real users in real conditions. And that feedback is infinitely more valuable than your assumptions about what people want. Tesla's over-the-air updates are a perfect example. They don't wait until software is perfect. They push updates constantly. Some work perfectly, some have bugs, but they're learning in real time what users actually need versus what Tesla thought they needed. And that real-time learning loop is how they stay ahead. So here's your challenge. Build something this week that you know is imperfect. Not pretty good. Imperfect. Something you're slightly embarrassed by. Something that's functional enough to test but nowhere near polished. And put it in front of real people. Get real feedback. See what breaks. And then, this is the key. Don't defend it. Don't explain why it's not perfect yet. Just watch, learn, take notes, and then destroy it and build version 2. That's the cycle. Build, test, break, learn, rebuild. And the faster you can complete that cycle, the faster you improve. Musk has internalized this so deeply that he's actually frustrated when things don't break. Because if nothing breaks, he's not pushing hard enough. He's not learning where the limits are. When a Starship prototype doesn't explode, he's simultaneously relieved and slightly disappointed. Because explosions reveal weaknesses. And weaknesses identified are weaknesses that can be fixed. You need to develop that same relationship with failure. Stop seeing it as evidence you weren't ready. Start seeing it as evidence you're pushing into new territory. Because here's the truth. If you're not failing regularly, you're not iterating fast enough. You're playing it safe. You're building within your comfort zone. You're optimizing for success rate instead of learning rate. And that's a long-term losing strategy. Because the world rewards speed of learning, not perfection of execution. Musk's companies don't succeed because they get everything right the first time. They succeed because they learn faster than everyone else. They compress decades of industry knowledge into years through aggressive iteration. And you can do the same thing. In your business, in your skills, in your creative work. Stop waiting to know the right answer. Start testing hypotheses. Stop planning the perfect approach. Start building the minimum viable version. Stop protecting your work from failure. Start using failure as data. Here's a practical framework, the weekly iteration cycle. Every week, you should complete one full iteration. Build something, test it, learn from it, plan the next version. Not every month, not when you feel ready, every week. That frequency forces you to simplify, to focus on what's essential, to stop overthinking. And over time, that weekly rhythm becomes automatic. You stop agonizing over decisions because you know you'll have another chance to adjust next week. Musk operates on even tighter cycles. Daily iterations during critical production ramps. Hourly adjustments during rocket tests. Because the faster the feedback loop, the faster the improvement. And speed of improvement is the only competitive advantage that actually compounds. Your competitors can copy your product. They can match your pricing. They can hire similar talent. But they can't match your learning rate if you're iterating faster than they are. That's the moat. That's the unfair advantage. Not being right the first time, but being wrong faster, learning quicker, and adapting before anyone else even finishes planning. So stop trying to get it right. Start trying to learn fast. Stop treating perfection as the goal. Start treating iteration as the process. Stop protecting version 1. Start building version 12. And in the next chapter, we're going to talk about what this all builds toward. We're going to explore how Musk works backward from impossible outcomes, how he starts at Mars and traces his way back to what he can do today. We're going to break down the reverse engineering mindset, how to define the endpoint that seems absurd and then calculate every preceding step until you land on something you can execute right now. But you can only do that if you've embraced iteration, if you've stopped demanding perfection and started optimizing for speed. So do that now. Build something imperfect this week. Test it, break it, learn from it, and then build the next version. That's how someone who thinks like Elon Musk operates. And it's how you accelerate past everyone who's still planning. You're iterating fast. You're building, breaking, learning. You've got momentum. But here's the problem. You're moving, but you don't know where. You're optimizing. You're improving. You're getting better at execution. But execution toward what exactly? Because here's what happens when you focus only on iteration without direction. You end up with a really polished version of something that doesn't actually matter. You've perfected the wrong thing. You've optimized for local maxima instead of the actual destination. And Elon Musk figured out how to avoid this trap entirely. He doesn't start with what's possible and work forward. He starts with what's impossible and works backward. And that single inversion, that one mental shift, changes everything. Most people look at where they are today and ask, what can I realistically achieve from here? Musk looks at where he wants humanity to be in 50 years and asks, what has to be true today to make that possible? It's the same question in reverse. But the psychology is completely different. When you start from where you are, your brain limits you. It defaults to incremental thinking, small steps, safe bets, realistic goals. But when you start from the impossible endpoint and trace backward, your brain has to bridge a gap it can't ignore. It has to solve for conditions that don't exist yet. It has to work backward through every necessary step until it lands on something you can do right now. And suddenly, what seemed impossible becomes a sequence. Let me show you exactly how Musk does this. In 2001, Musk decided humanity needed to become a multiplanetary species. Not someday. Not if it's convenient. It needed to happen. That's the impossible endpoint. A self-sustaining city on Mars. Now, most people would look at that goal and feel paralyzed. It's too big, too far away, too many unknowns. Where do you even start? But Musk didn't stare at the mountain. He started at the summit and worked backward. Okay, humans on Mars. What has to be true for that to happen? We need a way to transport large numbers of people and supplies to Mars repeatedly and affordably. What has to be true for that to happen? We need fully reusable rockets. Because disposable rockets will never be cheap enough to make Mars colonization economically viable. What has to be true for that to happen? We need to prove vertical landing is possible. We need to develop heat-resistant materials. We need to perfect rapid reusability. What has to be true for that to happen? We need to build a rocket company. We need to hire aerospace engineers. We need to secure funding. And what can I do today? Start SpaceX. You see how that works? The impossible becomes a sequence. And the sequence has a starting point that's available right now. That's reverse engineering. And it's the reason Musk isn't stuck in vague ambition. He's not dreaming about Mars. He's executing a calculated sequence that leads there. And you can use this same framework for anything you want to build. But first, you need to get comfortable with impossible endpoints. Right now, your goals are probably reasonable, achievable, realistic. And that's the problem. Reasonable goals produce reasonable results. They keep you operating within the constraints of what already exists. They don't force you to think differently. They don't demand innovation. Musk's goals are unreasonable by design. A city on Mars. Unreasonable. Transitioning the entire world to sustainable energy? Unreasonable. Merging human consciousness with AI? Unreasonable. But unreasonable goals force unreasonable thinking. And unreasonable thinking is where breakthroughs live. So here's your first step. Define an impossible outcome. Not a big goal. Not an ambitious target. An outcome that seems genuinely impossible from where you're standing today. Something that makes you uncomfortable just saying it out loud. For Musk, it was Mars. For you, it might be dominating your industry. Building a billion-dollar company. Solving a problem everyone says is unsolvable. Whatever it is, it needs to feel absurd. Because if it feels achievable, you're not thinking big enough. Now here's the key. You need to define it with specificity. Vague dreams don't work for reverse engineering. I want to be successful doesn't give you anything to work backward from. But I want to build a company that generates $100 million in annual revenue serving this specific market does. Musk didn't say, I want to do something cool with space. He said, I want to establish a self-sustaining city of 1 million people on Mars. That specificity matters. Because once you have a concrete endpoint, you can start identifying the conditions that must be true to reach it. So get specific. What does impossible actually look like? What are the numbers? What are the metrics? What does success look like in detail? Write it down. Make it real. Now comes the reverse engineering process. You're standing at that impossible endpoint, and you're going to work backward, step by step, until you reach today. Ask yourself, what has to be true for this outcome to exist? Not what would be nice. Not what might help. What absolutely must be true. When Musk reverse engineered Mars colonization, he didn't get distracted by auxiliary questions. He focused on the critical path. Humans on Mars requires affordable, reusable transportation. That's non-negotiable. Everything else is secondary. So identify your critical path. What's the one condition that absolutely must exist for your impossible outcome to be real? And then ask the question again. What has to be true for that condition to exist? You're building a chain. Each link is a necessary condition, and you keep working backward until you hit something that's within your reach today. Let me give you a practical example outside of SpaceX. Let's say your impossible outcome is, I want to be the most influential voice in my industry. Okay, work backward. What has to be true for that to happen? You need an audience of hundreds of thousands of people who trust your expertise. What has to be true for that to happen? You need to consistently deliver insights that are more valuable than what anyone else in your space is offering. What has to be true for that to happen? You need deep, proprietary knowledge that comes from real-world experience others don't have. What has to be true for that to happen? You need to be building, testing, and learning in the trenches, not just theorizing. What can you do today? Start building. Start testing. Start documenting what you learn. There's your starting point. You went from impossible to actionable today in 5 steps. That's the power of working backward. But here's where most people get stuck. They work backward and then they stop. They figure out the sequence. They see the path. And then they treat it like a plan they'll execute someday. Musk doesn't do that. Once he's worked backward to the starting point, he executes immediately. Because the entire exercise was about finding the action available today that begins the sequence. Not tomorrow. Not next month. Today. When Musk reverse engineered Mars colonization and landed on Start a Rocket Company, he didn't spend years preparing to start a rocket company. He started it. He didn't wait until he felt qualified. He didn't wait until the conditions were perfect. He worked backward to the starting point and then he moved. That's the critical piece. Reverse engineering isn't a planning exercise. It's an action trigger. You work backward to find clarity, and then you use that clarity to move forward immediately. So here's what I want you to do right now. Take your impossible outcome, the one you defined earlier, and work backward. Ask the question, what has to be true for this to exist? And keep asking it, working backward through the chain, until you land on something you can do this week, not something you can plan to do, something you can actually execute, and then do it. Don't analyze it further. Don't refine the plan. Don't wait for conditions to improve. Just take the first step in the sequence. Because here's what Musk understands that most people miss. The sequence isn't set in stone. Working backward gives you a map, but maps change. New information emerges. Conditions shift. Technologies evolve. Musk's original plan for SpaceX has been revised dozens of times. The rockets he's building today look nothing like what he first envisioned. But none of that matters. Because he's still on the path. He's still moving toward Mars. The destination hasn't changed. Only the route has gotten clearer. That's the beauty of reverse engineering. It doesn't lock you into a rigid plan. It gives you a direction and a starting point. And as you move forward, the next steps become clearer. You don't need to see the entire staircase. You just need to see the next step. And working backward from the impossible shows you which step is actually next. Now here's where this mindset becomes truly powerful. It forces you to think in systems, not tasks. When you work forward from where you are, you think in tasks. I need to do X, then Y, then Z. But when you work backward from impossible, you think in systems. For this outcome to exist, this system must be in place. For that system to exist, these conditions must be true. Musk doesn't think I need to build a rocket. He thinks for Mars colonization to be possible, a system for affordable, reusable space transportation must exist. For that system to exist, vertical landing must be proven. For vertical landing to be proven, we need these specific technological breakthroughs. It's a completely different level of thinking. And once you start thinking in systems, you stop getting distracted by busy work. Because you can filter every decision through one question. Does this advance the system I'm building toward the impossible outcome? If yes, do it. If no, ignore it. That clarity is what allows Musk to move so decisively. He's not juggling 1,000 priorities. He's executing one system at a time, each one a necessary condition for the impossible endpoint. So start thinking in systems. Your impossible outcome requires certain systems to be in place. What are they? What are the core systems that must exist for your vision to be real? And which of those systems can you start building today? When Tesla was just an idea, Musk reverse engineered what it would take to accelerate the world's transition to sustainable energy. The endpoint, the majority of vehicles on the road are electric. Working backward. For that to happen, electric cars need to be desirable, not just practical. For that to happen, they need to outperform gas cars. For that to happen, battery technology needs to advance. For that to happen, production needs to scale. For that to happen, we need to prove demand exists. Starting point. Build an electric sports car that's undeniably better than anything else on the market. That's why the Roadster existed. Not as the end goal, but as the first step in a sequence that leads to mass-market electric vehicles. Every product Tesla has launched since then has been another step in that backward-engineered sequence. And now you can see it working. The impossible outcome is becoming real. Not because Musk got lucky, but because he worked backward from Mars, or in this case, from sustainable transportation, and executed the sequence one step at a time. You can do the same thing. Define the impossible. Work backward through the necessary conditions. Identify the system you can start building today, and then build it. Don't wait for permission. Don't wait for perfect conditions. Don't wait until you've figured out steps 15 through 20. Just start executing the sequence. Because here's the truth. Working backward from impossible reveals something that working forward from possible never does. It shows you that the gap between where you are and where you want to be isn't actually a gap. It's a sequence. And sequences can be executed. One step. One system. One necessary condition at a time. Musk isn't superhuman. He's just operating from a different starting point. Instead of asking what's realistic from here, he asks what's necessary for there. And then he works backward until he finds the step that's available today. That's the entire framework. So stop staring at the mountain. Stop feeling overwhelmed by how far you have to go. Start at the summit. Define what impossible looks like, and then work backward until you find the trailhead. And in the next chapter, we're going to talk about what happens when you start executing the sequence and the pressure becomes unbearable. We're going to explore how Musk normalizes catastrophic pressure, how he operates on the edge of company collapse and treats it as baseline, how he's recalibrated his nervous system to function under conditions that would paralyze most people. Because once you start working backward from impossible, the pressure intensifies. The stakes get higher. The challenges multiply. And you need to be ready for that. But you can only handle that pressure if you've done the work here. If you've defined your impossible outcome and identified the sequence that leads to it. So do that now. Work backward from your impossible. Find the necessary conditions. Identify the starting point. And then take the first step. That's how someone who thinks like Elon Musk turns impossible into inevitable. And it's how you move from dreaming to executing. You know where you're going. You've worked backward from impossible. You've identified the sequence. And now you're executing. You're taking steps. You're making progress. But the pressure is building. The stakes are higher than they've ever been. The risk feels overwhelming. The weight of what you're trying to accomplish is crushing down on you every single day. And you're thinking, maybe I should pull back. Maybe I should choose something easier. Maybe this level of pressure isn't sustainable. And here's what I need you to understand. That feeling, that catastrophic pressure you're experiencing, is exactly where you need to be. Because Elon Musk learned something that most people never figure out. Comfort doesn't build capacity. Pressure does. And if you keep choosing comfort, you'll stay exactly who you are forever. Let me paint you a picture of what catastrophic pressure actually looks like. Tesla is months from bankruptcy. SpaceX has failed 3 rocket launches in a row and has 1 launch left before the money runs out. Musk has poured his entire fortune into both companies. His marriage is falling apart. The media is predicting his total collapse. And he's sleeping on the factory floor, working 100-hour weeks, trying to save both companies simultaneously. That's not pressure. That's existential crisis playing out in real time. Most people would collapse under that weight. Most people would choose one company and let the other die. Most people would tap out, admit defeat, take the safe exit. But Musk didn't tap out. He didn't choose safe. He leaned into the pressure harder. And here's what's critical to understand. That wasn't the exception. That's been his baseline for 2 decades. While you're avoiding pressure, Musk is normalizing it. While you're seeking comfort, he's seeking conditions that exceed his current capacity. Because he understands something fundamental. The version of you that exists in comfort is the weakest version of you, the strongest version. The version that's actually capable of achieving impossible things only emerges under pressure. And you can't access that version by staying safe. Most people treat pressure like the enemy, like something to minimize. like something that needs to be managed and controlled and reduced. But Musk treats pressure like a training environment, a place where his nervous system learns to operate under conditions that would break most people, a place where his decision-making gets tested in real time with real consequences, a place where his capabilities expand because they have to. That's the reframe you need to make. Pressure isn't damage, it's development. But here's the problem. Your nervous system is wired to avoid it. Your brain interprets high-stakes situations as threats. And when it senses threat, it activates your survival response. Fight, flight, or freeze. None of which are useful when you're trying to build something that matters. So you pull back. You reduce the stakes. You choose environments where failure isn't catastrophic. And you think that's smart. You think you're being strategic. But what you're actually doing is training yourself to operate in low-pressure environments. And the more you do that, the more fragile you become, because your capacity doesn't grow in comfort. It atrophies. Musk has been operating on the edge of collapse for so long that his nervous system has recalibrated. What would feel catastrophic to you feels normal to him. Running 2 companies simultaneously while both are dying? Baseline. Betting everything on a technology that's never been proven? Baseline. Making promises he doesn't know how to keep yet? Baseline. He's not superhuman. He's just normalized a level of pressure that exceeds what most people will ever voluntarily choose. And that normalization is what allows him to function when everyone else freezes. So here's the question you need to ask yourself. What level of pressure are you normalizing? Because whatever level you're currently operating at, that's your baseline. That's what feels normal to your nervous system. And your baseline determines your ceiling. If you normalize low-stakes environments, you'll collapse under moderate pressure. If you normalize moderate pressure, you'll struggle under high stakes. But if you normalize catastrophic pressure, suddenly, everything else feels manageable. Musk has normalized conditions that would paralyze most people. So when a rocket explodes, when production targets are missed, when stock prices crash, his nervous system doesn't interpret it as emergency. It interprets it as Tuesday. And that allows him to keep thinking clearly, keep making decisions, keep moving forward. You need to start building that same tolerance. Not by waiting for catastrophic pressure to find you, but by deliberately choosing environments that exceed your current capacity. Here's how this works in practice. Right now, you're probably operating within your comfort zone. The projects you're taking on, the risks you're accepting, the timelines you're committing to, they're all calibrated to feel achievable. And that feels responsible. That feels like good judgment. But it's actually killing your growth. Because when you only take on challenges you know you can handle, you never develop the capacity to handle challenges you can't. Your nervous system learns that this level of pressure is the maximum, and it stops adapting. Musk doesn't operate that way. He deliberately chooses challenges that exceed his current capability. When he started SpaceX, he didn't know how to build rockets. When he took over Tesla, he didn't know how to manufacture cars at scale. When he announced fully autonomous driving, the technology didn't exist yet. Every single time, he committed to something before he had the capacity to deliver it. And that commitment forced the capacity to develop. That's the mechanism. Commitment creates pressure. Pressure forces adaptation. Adaptation builds capability. But you can't trigger that cycle if you're only committing to things you already know how to do. So here's your first move. Choose something that scares you. Not something that's mildly uncomfortable. Something that genuinely terrifies you because you don't know if you can pull it off. A timeline that feels impossible. A commitment that exceeds your current resources. A goal that requires a version of you that doesn't exist yet. And then commit to it publicly, irreversibly, in a way that creates real consequences if you fail. That's how you raise your baseline. When Musk announced that Tesla would achieve full self-driving capability, he created massive pressure. The technology wasn't ready. The timeline was aggressive. And he said it publicly, in front of investors, customers, the entire world. That public commitment forced urgency. It forced resourcefulness. It forced solutions that wouldn't have emerged in a low-pressure environment. Did they hit the timeline? No. But did they make progress they never would have made without that pressure? Absolutely. That's the trade. You accept the risk of public failure in exchange for the forcing function that pressure creates. And over time, as you survive that pressure repeatedly, your nervous system recalibrates. What felt catastrophic the first time feels manageable the 10th time. What paralyzed you initially becomes routine. Your baseline rises. And as your baseline rises, your ceiling rises with it. Now, here's where this gets psychologically difficult. Normalizing pressure means accepting that you're going to live in discomfort, not temporarily, not until things settle down, permanently. Because the moment you get comfortable, you stop growing. The moment the pressure feels manageable, you're no longer exceeding your capacity. Musk has said in interviews that he expects to feel stressed for the rest of his life. Not because he's a pessimist, but because he's committed to operating at the edge of his capability indefinitely. That's not sustainable for everyone. And I'm not suggesting you need to match Musk's intensity. But you do need to get comfortable being uncomfortable. Most people treat discomfort like a problem to solve, like something temporary they're enduring until they reach a place of stability. But Musk treats discomfort like evidence he's in the right environment, like confirmation that he's pushing into territory that demands more than he currently is. That's the reframe. Discomfort isn't the problem. It's the signal that you're growing. And if you're not feeling it regularly, you're not growing. So here's a practical framework, the stretch environment principle. Whatever environment you're currently in, whatever level of pressure you're experiencing, ask yourself, is this demanding more than I currently am? If the answer is no, you're in a comfort zone. And comfort zones don't build capacity, they maintain it. You need to deliberately place yourself in environments that stretch you, where the demands exceed your current capability, where failure is a real possibility. When Tesla was ramping Model 3 production, Musk moved into the factory. He didn't observe from a distance. He didn't manage from the comfort of an office. He put himself in the environment where the pressure was most intense, where every decision had immediate consequences, where he could feel the weight of every bottleneck, every delay, every failure. That's a stretch environment. And it forced him to operate at a level he wouldn't have reached from a position of comfort. You need to find your equivalent. What's the environment that would demand more from you than you're currently giving? What's the situation that would force you to develop capabilities you don't have yet? And then put yourself in it, deliberately, uncomfortably. Because here's what happens. Your nervous system adapts. The first week in a stretch environment feels overwhelming. You're constantly on edge. You're questioning if you can handle it. But by week 4, what felt overwhelming starts to feel manageable. Your decision-making speeds up. Your stress response dampens. You develop new capabilities because you have to. And by week 12, what used to be your stretch environment is now your new baseline. That's how capacity builds. Not through comfort, through repeated exposure to pressure that exceeds your current operating level. Musk has done this so many times that his baseline is unrecognizable compared to where he started. Running one company used to feel like maximum capacity. Then he normalized that and took on 2, then 3, then 4. Each time, the pressure felt catastrophic. And each time, he adapted. And now he operates at a level that would have destroyed the version of him that existed 20 years ago. But that version had to die for this version to emerge. And it died in the pressure. You need to let your current version die too. The version of you that seeks comfort, that avoids risk, that plays it safe. That version needs to go. Not because it's bad, but because it can't build what you want to build. The version that can build impossible things only emerges under impossible pressure. So stop protecting yourself from it. Stop treating catastrophic pressure like something to avoid. Start treating it like the environment where transformation happens. Here's the final piece. You need to redefine what safety actually means. Right now, you probably think safety is avoiding risk, minimizing pressure, staying in control. But Musk operates from a completely different definition. Safety is capability. The more capable you are, the safer you actually are. Because capability means you can handle whatever comes. You can adapt. You can recover. You can solve problems in real time. But if you've spent your whole life avoiding pressure, you haven't built that capability. So when catastrophe actually hits, and it will, you're fragile. You break. Musk doesn't break. Not because catastrophe doesn't hit him, but because he's been training in catastrophic environments for decades. He's built the operating system that functions under conditions most people can't even imagine. And that operating system is what actually keeps him safe. So if you want real safety, not the illusion of it, you need to build real capability. And you build capability by choosing pressure, not avoiding it. Stop seeking comfort. Start seeking environments that demand more than you currently have. Stop treating pressure as the enemy. Start treating it as the training ground. Stop protecting your current capacity. start exceeding it. Because in the next chapter, we're going to talk about what happens when you're operating under this level of pressure and your ego starts getting in the way. We're going to explore how Musk builds for the mission instead of his image. How he detaches from outcomes so completely that winning or losing can't touch his sense of self. Because once you normalize catastrophic pressure, the next trap is letting your ego turn every challenge into a referendum on your worth. And if you can't detach from that, the pressure will destroy you. But you can only learn detachment if you first learn to operate under pressure, if you've normalized discomfort, if you've raised your baseline. So do that now. Choose the stretch environment. The one that exceeds your current capacity. The one that feels like too much. And step into it. That's how someone who thinks like Elon Musk builds capability. And it's how you transform from who you are into who you need to become. You're operating under catastrophic pressure now. You've normalized discomfort. You've raised your baseline. But there's a new problem emerging. And it's more dangerous than the pressure itself. You're starting to care too much about how this looks. Every decision is becoming a statement about who you are. Every outcome is becoming evidence of your worth. Every failure feels like proof you're not good enough. Every success feels like validation you desperately need. And that weight, that need to be right, to be validated, to look good, is slowing you down. Because you're not building for the mission anymore, you're building for your ego. And Elon Musk learned a long time ago that ego is the heaviest thing you can carry. Let me show you what I mean. Musk is on Twitter at 2 a.m., fighting with critics. Tesla stock is tanking. Analysts are predicting bankruptcy. The media is calling him unstable. And he's defending himself, explaining himself, trying to prove everyone wrong. His ego is in the driver's seat. And it's destroying him. But here's what changed. Musk stopped caring about being right. He stopped caring about his image. He stopped caring whether people thought he was winning or losing. And the moment he detached from those outcomes, everything got easier. Not because the pressure went away, but because the pressure stopped being about him. It became about the mission. And missions don't have egos. This is the shift that separates people who burn out under pressure from people who thrive in it. It's not about working harder or being tougher. It's about untangling your identity from the outcome. Most people can't do this. They need the win to feel valuable. They need the validation to feel worthy. They need people to see them succeeding to feel like they matter. And that need makes them fragile. Because when your identity is tied to outcomes, every setback feels existential. Every criticism feels like an attack on who you are. Every failure threatens to collapse your entire sense of self. And you can't operate clearly when the stakes are that personal. Musk's companies have almost died multiple times. SpaceX burned through 3 failed rocket launches before the 4th succeeded. Tesla has been weeks from bankruptcy more than once. His reputation has been publicly shredded. And yet he keeps building. Not because none of that hurts, but because his identity isn't anchored there. He's not building SpaceX to prove he's smart. He's building it to make humanity multiplanetary. He's not building Tesla to be validated as a visionary. He's building it to accelerate sustainable energy. The mission is the anchor, not his ego. And when the mission is the anchor, wins and losses stop being personal. They just become data points in service of something bigger. That's the freedom you need to find. Right now, you're probably measuring success by how it makes you look, how it validates your choices, how it proves to other people and to yourself that you're capable. And every time things don't go perfectly, it feels like a referendum on your worth. But here's the truth. Your worth has nothing to do with your outcomes. You're not more valuable when you succeed. You're not less valuable when you fail. Your identity exists independently of results. And until you internalize that, you'll never be free to build at the level you're capable of. Let me show you what detachment actually looks like. When SpaceX's Starship prototypes were exploding one after another, Musk wasn't spiraling into self-doubt. He wasn't questioning his competence. He wasn't measuring his worth by whether the rocket landed. He was asking, what did we learn? What can we change? Does this advance us toward a fully reusable transportation system? That's mission focus. That's ego detachment. He separated the outcome. The rocket exploded from his identity. The explosion didn't mean he was failing. It meant the design had a weakness that needed addressing. And because he wasn't defending his ego, he could see the problem clearly and fix it. But when your ego's involved, you can't see clearly, because you're not analyzing the problem. You're protecting yourself from the implications of the problem. You're asking, what does this failure say about me? Instead of, what does this failure teach me? And that question, that ego-driven question, keeps you stuck. So here's the shift you need to make. Stop asking if you're winning. Start asking if the mission is advancing. Those are two completely different questions. Am I winning is about you, your image, your validation, your proof. Is the mission advancing is about the work, the progress, the outcome that matters beyond your ego. And when you anchor to the second question, the first one becomes irrelevant. Musk doesn't need Tesla to succeed to prove he's capable. Tesla needs to succeed because the world needs sustainable transportation. That's a completely different motivation. And that difference changes everything. When you're building to prove yourself, every setback is devastating because it threatens the validation you're seeking. But when you're building to advance a mission, setbacks are just obstacles. Painful, yes, but not personal. The mission continues whether your ego feels good about it or not. Now, here's where this gets tricky. Detachment doesn't mean apathy. A lot of people here detach from outcomes and think it means stop caring, stop trying, stop being invested. But that's not what Musk does. He cares deeply. He's intensely invested. He pushes harder than almost anyone on the planet. But his investment is in the mission, not in being right about the mission. There's a massive difference. When you're invested in being right, you become defensive. You can't pivot. You can't admit mistakes. You can't change course without it feeling like failure. But when you're invested in the mission, you'll do whatever it takes to advance it. Even if that means admitting you were wrong. Even if that means scrapping your original plan. Even if that means looking foolish. Because your identity isn't at stake. Only the mission is. Musk has changed his mind publicly countless times. He's admitted mistakes. He's reversed decisions. He's pivoted strategies. And none of that threatens him. Because he's not building a monument to his correctness. He's building companies that serve a purpose. So here's your challenge. Identify where your ego is sabotaging your progress. Where are you defending a position because admitting you're wrong would hurt your image? Where are you avoiding a necessary pivot because it would look like failure? Where are you making decisions to be validated instead of to advance the mission? Get honest, because ego sabotage is subtle. It disguises itself as conviction, as commitment, as consistency. But underneath, it's just fear. Fear that changing course means you were wrong. And being wrong means you're not who you thought you were. Musk doesn't have that fear, because he's not who he thought he was. He's just someone in service of missions that matter more than his self-image. And that gives him operational freedom you can't access while your ego is driving. Here's a practical framework: the mission filter. Before you make any decision, ask yourself, am I doing this because it advances the mission or because it protects my ego? If it's the latter, pause. Because ego-driven decisions always disappoint. Even when they work, they don't deliver the satisfaction you're seeking. Because what you're really seeking isn't success. It's validation. And validation from outcomes is a void you can never fill. But if the decision advances the mission, move forward. Regardless of how it makes you look. Regardless of whether people understand. Regardless of whether it validates your original plan. Just advance the mission. When Tesla's Cybertruck design was mocked globally, Musk didn't redesign it to protect his image. He kept the design. Because the design served the mission. Creating a durable electric utility vehicle. Better than a conventional truck would have. His ego wasn't involved. So the mockery didn't matter. That's the clarity detachment creates. Now, here's the deeper truth. Detachment from outcomes doesn't just protect you from failure. It protects you from success. Because success can be just as dangerous to your ego as failure. When you succeed and your identity is tied to that success, you start needing to protect it. You become conservative. You avoid risks that could threaten your winning streak. You stop building for the mission and start building to maintain your image as someone who wins. And that's when you stop innovating. Musk has been successful by almost any measure, but he doesn't protect that success. He risks it constantly. He could have sold Tesla at its peak valuation and retired wealthy and validated. Instead, he's pouring resources into new ventures that could fail. He's taking on challenges that could destroy his reputation. Because his identity isn't successful entrepreneur. It's person advancing these specific missions. And those missions require risk. They require potential failure. They require letting go of the safe, validated position. So success doesn't trap him. It just becomes fuel for the next attempt. You need to develop that same relationship with outcomes. Success isn't proof you're worthy. Failure isn't proof you're not. They're just feedback in service of the mission. And when you see them that way, you can use both. You can learn from failure without being destroyed by it. You can leverage success without being trapped by it. Here's what this looks like practically. When something succeeds, don't celebrate your competence. Analyze what worked and apply it to the next challenge. When something fails, don't spiral into self-doubt. Analyze what broke and fix it in the next iteration. Neither outcome is about you. Both are about the mission. Musk has been asked in interviews how he handles the pressure of potentially being wrong about massive bets like Mars colonization or full autonomy. And his answer is always some version of, I don't know if I'm right. I just know these missions matter. So I'm going to keep working on them until the data says to stop or the outcome is achieved. That's detachment. That's mission focus. He's not attached to being the guy who was right about Mars. He's attached to making Mars colonization possible. And if someone else figures it out first, if his approach is wrong and a different path emerges, that's fine. Because the mission advances either way. Can you say the same thing about your work? If someone else achieves your goal before you do, does that devastate you? Or does it advance the mission you actually care about? If your approach is proven wrong and you need to start over, does that threaten your identity? Or does it just give you new information? The answers to those questions reveal where your ego is still running the show. And wherever ego is driving, you're vulnerable. Because ego needs outcomes to go a certain way. And outcomes don't cooperate. But missions just need progress. And progress can come from anywhere, including paths you didn't predict and outcomes you didn't plan. So here's your action step. Rewrite your relationship with success and failure. Stop treating them as reflections of your worth. Start treating them as information in service of something bigger. And identify what that bigger thing actually is. What's the mission? Not the goal that validates you. The mission that matters whether you're validated or not. For Musk, it's making life multiplanetary. It's accelerating sustainable energy. It's advancing human capability. For you, it might be solving a specific problem, building a specific type of company, creating a specific kind of impact. Whatever it is, anchor there, and let everything else, your image, your need to be right, your desire for validation, fall away. Because when the mission is clear and your ego is detached, you become unstoppable. Not because you never fail, but because failure doesn't stop you anymore. Not because you always win, but because winning isn't why you're playing. You're playing because the mission demands it. And that's reason enough. And in the next chapter, we're going to take everything we've built and apply it to the moment of catastrophic failure. We're going to explore how Musk recalibrates what failure actually means, how he treats explosions as expensive experiments, how he extracts value from destruction instead of being destroyed by it. Because once you've detached your ego from outcomes, you need to rebuild your definition of failure entirely. And that's when you become truly unstoppable. But you can only redefine failure if you first detached from needing to avoid it. So do that now. Separate your identity from your outcomes. Anchor to the mission. Filter every decision through whether it advances the work, not whether it protects your image. That's how someone who thinks like Elon Musk operates under pressure without being crushed by it. And it's how you build something that outlives your ego. You've detached from outcomes. You're building for the mission, not your ego. And then, everything falls apart. The launch fails. The product breaks. The timeline collapses. Months of work gone. Resources burned. Reputation damaged. And you're standing in the wreckage trying to figure out if this is the end. Most people call this failure. They label it, internalize it, let it define them. But Elon Musk calls it something else entirely. He calls it data. September 2016. SpaceX's Falcon 9 rocket explodes on the launch pad during a routine pre-flight test. The explosion is massive, spectacular. The rocket is completely destroyed. Facebook satellite, the payload, gone. Millions of dollars, vaporized in seconds. And Musk's response. He immediately assembles the team to analyze the footage frame by frame, to collect data from every sensor, to reverse engineer exactly what went wrong, because to him, that explosion wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning of understanding something. That's the reframe that changes everything. And it's the final piece of the mindset you need to build impossible things. Because here's the truth. You're going to fail. Catastrophically. Publicly. Painfully. And if you treat that failure as evidence you should stop, you'll never build anything that matters. But if you treat it as expensive education, you become unstoppable. Most people have been taught that failure is the opposite of success. That it's something to avoid, something to minimize, something that means you weren't good enough, smart enough, prepared enough. And that definition keeps them paralyzed. Because if failure means you're inadequate, then every risk becomes existential. Every attempt becomes a test of your worth. And the fear of failure becomes heavier than the failure itself. But Musk operates from a completely different definition. To him, failure isn't the opposite of success. It's part of the process of success. It's not evidence you should stop. It's information about what needs to change. And once you internalize that reframe, the entire game changes. Because failure stops being this heavy emotional thing. It becomes data. Information. Feedback you paid for. When SpaceX's first 3 rockets failed to reach orbit, Musk didn't spiral into self-doubt. He didn't question whether he should be in the rocket business. He asked, what did we learn? What component failed? What assumption was wrong? What can we change in the next design? Those are completely different questions than why did I fail? And the questions you ask determine whether failure destroys you or develops you. Here's the shift you need to make. Stop asking why you failed. Start asking what you learned. Why did I fail is backward looking. It's about assigning blame, finding fault, protecting ego. But what did I learn is forward looking. It's about extracting value, identifying patterns, building knowledge. And knowledge compounds. Blame doesn't. Musk has said explicitly in interviews, failure is an option here. If things are not failing, you are not innovating enough. That's not recklessness. That's a fundamental understanding that failure is the price of pushing boundaries. If you're not failing, you're not attempting anything difficult enough to matter. You're playing it safe, operating within known limits, building things that have been built before. And that might feel comfortable, but it's not growth. Growth only happens at the edge of failure, in the territory where success isn't guaranteed, where the outcome is uncertain. And the only way to operate in that territory is to remove the emotional weight from failure. So let's do that right now. Think about your biggest recent failure, the one that still stings, the one you're still carrying. Now ask yourself, what label have I attached to this? Are you calling it proof you're not good enough? Evidence you should have waited longer? Confirmation that you're not cut out for this? Those labels are destroying you. Because they're not descriptions of what happened. They're judgments about who you are. And those judgments are preventing you from extracting the actual value. Here's what Musk would do with that same failure. He'd treat it as a diagnostic report. A detailed breakdown of what didn't work, which assumptions were wrong, which systems failed, which variables weren't accounted for. Not to assign blame, but to identify what needs to change in the next version. That's the reframe. Every failure is a diagnostic report. And diagnostic reports aren't personal. They're just information. When a rocket explodes, it tells you exactly where the weakness is. The explosion is the diagnostic. And that diagnostic is valuable. More valuable, actually, than a successful launch. Because success can hide weaknesses. But failure exposes them. So Musk doesn't mourn the explosion. He analyzes it. He extracts every piece of data. He uses it to build a better rocket. And then he launches again. That's the cycle. Attempt. Fail. Diagnose. Improve. Attempt again. And the speed of that cycle determines how fast you progress. Most people get stuck at fail. They stop there. They process it emotionally. They question themselves. They wait to recover. But Musk moves immediately to diagnose. Because the faster you extract the lesson, the faster you can apply it. And the faster you apply it, the less expensive the failure actually was. Here's a practical framework, the failure debrief. Within 24 hours of any significant setback, sit down and write out 3 things. 1. What specifically went wrong? Not in vague terms. In precise, technical detail. What broke? What assumption failed? What variable wasn't accounted for? 2. What does this tell me that I didn't know before? What did I learn about the system, the market, the approach, myself? 3. What's the smallest change I can make in the next attempt based on this new information? That's it. 3 questions. And they transform failure from emotional devastation into actionable intelligence. Musk does this reflexively. When Starship prototypes explode, he doesn't disappear to process the loss. He's immediately in meetings, reviewing telemetry, identifying the failure mode, planning the next iteration. Because to him, the explosion isn't the story. The learning is. And the faster he learns, the faster he gets to a version that works. Now here's where this gets psychologically difficult. You have to be willing to fail again. Most people fail once and then become risk averse. They overcompensate. They add safety margins. They avoid anything that might produce another failure. And that cautiousness kills their momentum. Because the lesson from failure isn't be more careful. It's be more informed. You don't need to avoid risk. You need to understand risk better. When SpaceX's rockets were exploding, Musk didn't pull back and design safer, more conservative rockets. He kept pushing the edge. He kept testing limits. He kept failing. But each failure made the next attempt smarter. Not safer. Smarter. There's a massive difference. Safety means avoiding failure. Intelligence means failing productively. And productive failure is what actually builds capability. So here's the mindset shift. Budget for failure. Not emotionally. Financially and temporally. When you start a project, assume some percentage of attempts will fail. Not because you're pessimistic, but because you're realistic about operating at the edge of your capability. Musk doesn't plan for every rocket to succeed. He plans for a certain failure rate and budgets accordingly. He knows that pushing boundaries means some things will break, and he'd rather break things and learn than play it safe and stagnate. So he builds failure into the plan. He allocates resources for it. He accepts it as part of the cost of innovation, and that acceptance removes the emotional charge. When you've budgeted for failure, it's not catastrophic when it happens. It's expected. It's just part of the process. Here's what that looks like practically. When you're planning your next major initiative, ask yourself, how many attempts am I willing to make before I conclude this won't work? If the answer is 1, you're not actually committed. You're just testing the waters. But if the answer is 10, 20, 50, now you're operating like Musk. Now you've given yourself permission to fail multiple times in service of eventually succeeding. And that permission is what allows you to move boldly, because you're not betting everything on one attempt. You're betting that iteration will eventually produce the outcome. And iteration always wins, eventually. Musk has blown up more rockets than most companies even build. But he's also achieved things no other private company has achieved in aerospace. Not because he avoided failure, but because he failed faster and learned more from each failure than anyone else. That's the competitive advantage. Not perfection, productive failure. Now here's the final piece. You have to internalize that the cost of trying is always less than the cost of wondering. Right now, you're probably avoiding something. Some attempt you're scared to make. Some risk you're not willing to take. And you're telling yourself it's because the cost of failure is too high. But is it really? Or is the real cost the regret of never knowing? Musk has been asked what he'd do if SpaceX ultimately fails to achieve Mars colonization. And his answer is always some version of, at least we tried. At least we pushed humanity in that direction. The alternative, not trying, is unacceptable. That's the frame. Trying and failing is better than never trying at all. Because when you try and fail, you learn. You grow. You contribute data to the field. You advance the conversation. But when you don't try, you just wonder. Forever. And wondering is a special kind of torment. So ask yourself right now, what am I avoiding because I'm afraid to fail? And then ask, is the cost of failing actually higher than the cost of spending the rest of my life wondering if I could have done it? Most of the time, the answer is no. The actual cost of failure, lost time, lost resources, damaged pride, is recoverable. Painful, yes, but recoverable. But the cost of wondering, that's permanent. So here's your action step. Make the attempt you've been avoiding. Not because you're certain it'll work, but because the only way to know is to try. And if it fails, treat it like Musk would, as expensive education, as a diagnostic report, as data you can use to build the next version. Because here's the truth about failure. It only exists when you stop. Everything else is just iteration. SpaceX's first 3 rockets failed. But they weren't failures. They were tests. Expensive tests, yes, but tests. The failure would have been if Musk stopped after the 3rd explosion and said, "I guess rockets aren't for me." But he didn't stop. So it wasn't failure. It was progress. And the same is true for you. Whatever you're building, whatever you're attempting, you haven't failed until you quit. Everything else is just information, feedback, data you paid for with time, money, or pride. And as long as you're extracting value from that data, you're winning. Not in the way most people define winning, but in the way that actually matters. You're learning. You're improving. You're getting closer to the version that works. And that's all success actually is. Not avoiding failure, but failing productively until you don't. So stop fearing failure. Start budgeting for it. Start extracting from it. Start using it. Treat every breakdown as a diagnostic report. Ask what it taught you, not why it happened. And then apply that lesson immediately in the next attempt. That's how someone who thinks like Elon Musk transforms catastrophic setbacks into accelerated progress. And in the final chapter, we're going to bring everything together. We're going to talk about what happens when you've built all of this. When you've learned to think clearly, calculate risk, operate in public, generate your own gravity, iterate rapidly, reverse engineer the impossible, normalize pressure, detach from ego, and reframe failure. We're going to explore the final piece. How Musk commits before he's certain. How he makes decisions irreversible to unlock the urgency that forces solutions. Because everything we've built leads to this one critical moment. The moment where you have to decide, do I commit or do I keep preparing? And that decision changes everything. But you can only make that decision if you've done the work here. If you've removed the fear of failure. If you've learned to extract value from setbacks instead of being destroyed by them. So do that now. Take the failure you've been carrying. Reframe it. Extract the lesson. Apply it to the next attempt. That's how someone who thinks like Elon Musk moves through catastrophic loss without stopping. And it's how you turn every setback into fuel for the next breakthrough. You've built the entire framework. You think in first principles. You quantify risk. You operate in public. You've generated your own gravity. You iterate rapidly. You work backward from impossible. You've normalized pressure. You've detached your ego. You've reframed failure. And now you're standing at the edge of the biggest decision you've ever made. And you're waiting. Waiting to be certain. Waiting for the fear to subside. Waiting for some sign that guarantees this will work. But here's what you need to understand. That certainty you're waiting for, it's never coming. And Elon Musk figured out a long time ago that waiting for certainty is just another way of choosing never. Musk takes $100 million from the PayPal sale and commits it to SpaceX. Not after he's certain rockets are viable. Not after he's proven the business model. Not after he's secured government contracts. He commits before any of that exists. He announces publicly that he's going to build reusable rockets. He hires engineers. He leases facilities. He makes the decision irreversible. And then, only then, does he figure out how to actually do it. That's not recklessness. That's the irreversible decision advantage. And it's the final piece of the mindset that separates people who dream from people who build. Most people think commitment comes after certainty. You figure it out first, then you commit. But Musk operates in reverse. He commits first. And that commitment creates the conditions for certainty. Because here's what happens when you make a decision irreversible. Your brain stops negotiating and starts solving. As long as you have an escape route, your brain treats the decision as optional. It keeps one foot out the door. It hedges. It plans for retreat. But when you burn the bridges, when you make it public, permanent, irreversible, your brain shifts into a completely different mode. It stops asking, should I do this? And starts asking, how do I make this work? And that question, that shift from whether to how, unlocks problem-solving capacity you didn't know you had. Musk does this constantly. He announces timelines before he knows how to meet them. He makes promises before he's solved the technical challenges. He commits publicly before he's figured it out privately. And every time, people say he's overpromising, that he's being unrealistic, that he's setting himself up for failure. And maybe he is. Maybe the timelines slip. Maybe the promises take longer than predicted. But here's what those critics miss. The public commitment is the forcing function. When Musk announced that Tesla would achieve full self-driving, the technology didn't exist yet. The neural networks weren't trained. The problem wasn't solved. But the public commitment, the irreversible statement that this will happen, created urgency. It mobilized resources. It focused attention. It removed the option of maybe we'll get to this someday. It became, we have to solve this now, because we've already committed. And that urgency is what drives breakthroughs. Without the irreversible commitment, teams procrastinate. They explore safer options. They avoid the hard problems. But with the commitment made publicly, irreversibly, those hard problems become mandatory. You can't ignore them anymore. You can't postpone them. You have to solve them because you've already told the world you will. That's the advantage. Commitment doesn't wait for solutions. Commitment forces solutions. Now, here's what makes this terrifying. You're committing before you know how. Every part of you wants to figure it out first, to have the plan mapped, to know it's possible before you say it's possible. But Musk has learned that if you wait for that, you never move. Because complex problems don't reveal their solutions until you're deep inside them. You can't plan your way to breakthrough. You have to commit your way there. When SpaceX decided to land rockets vertically, no one had done it successfully at scale. The physics was uncertain. The engineering was unproven. And Musk could have waited. He could have run more simulations, done more research, waited for certainty. But instead, he committed. He announced it publicly. He allocated resources. He made it the mission. And then the team had no choice but to figure it out. Because the commitment was already made. The bridges were already burned. That's the psychology. Irreversible decisions create urgency that reversible decisions never do. So here's the question you need to ask yourself. What decision are you postponing because you're waiting for certainty? What commitment are you avoiding because you don't know how it'll work yet? Because that's your leverage point. That's where the breakthrough lies. Not in more planning. Not in more preparation. In the irreversible commitment that forces you to figure it out. Now let me show you what this looks like practically. When you make a reversible decision, you're always evaluating whether to continue. Every setback becomes a reason to reconsider. Every challenge becomes an opportunity to retreat. But when you make an irreversible decision, those same setbacks just become problems to solve. Because retreat isn't an option anymore. You've burned that bridge. So the only direction is forward. Musk has structured his entire approach around this principle. When he moved to Texas to oversee Starship development, he didn't keep his home in California as a backup. He sold it. He made the move irreversible. When he committed Tesla to going all in on electric, he didn't hedge with hybrid models. He went full electric, made it irreversible. When he announced Neuralink's timeline for human trials, he created public pressure that made retreat unacceptable. Every time, he removes the escape route. And every time, that removal forces solutions that wouldn't have emerged otherwise. So here's your framework, the irreversible commitment protocol. Take the decision you've been postponing, the one you're waiting to be certain about, and make it irreversible. Publicly. Permanently. Announce it to people who will hold you accountable. Invest resources you can't easily recover. Set a deadline that creates real consequences. And then, this is critical, accept that you don't know how yet. You're not committing because you've figured it out. You're committing to force yourself to figure it out. That's the shift. Commitment before certainty. When Musk announced that SpaceX would land humans on Mars, he didn't have the technology. He didn't have the spacecraft. He didn't even have a fully proven landing system. But the commitment was made. Publicly. Irreversibly. And that commitment has driven every decision since. Every rocket iteration. Every technology development. Every resource allocation. Because Mars isn't optional anymore. It's the committed destination. And the only question is how to get there. Now, here's where most people get stuck. They confuse commitment with certainty. They think committing means you're sure it'll work. But that's not what Musk does. He commits knowing it might not work. Knowing the timeline might slip. Knowing he might fail publicly. But he also knows that without the commitment, nothing happens. With the commitment, at least there's a chance. At least the problem solving starts. At least the resources mobilize. And that chance, that activation of problem solving capacity, is worth the risk of public failure. So stop waiting for certainty. It's a luxury you can't afford if you want to build anything that matters. Certainty comes after commitment, not before. You commit first. And then you work backward from that commitment until you find the solutions. Here's what this looks like in real time. You decide what you're going to build. You announce it publicly. You set a timeline. You allocate resources. And then you wake up every day with the same question. What has to be true today to make this commitment real? Not should I still do this, but how do I make this happen? That question. How instead of whether is what keeps you moving when doubt shows up. Because doubt will show up constantly. You'll question the timeline. You'll question the approach. You'll question whether you're capable. But if the commitment is irreversible, those questions don't matter. You're not reevaluating whether to continue. You're just figuring out the next step. Musk has been asked in interviews how he maintains conviction when things look impossible. And his answer is always some version of, I've already committed. So the only question is how, not whether. That's the frame. The commitment removes the whether. And once whether is gone, all your mental energy goes into how. And how always has answers. It just takes work to find them. So here's your action step. Make the commitment this week. Not next month. Not when you're ready. This week. Announce the thing you're going to build. Set the timeline. Make it public. Make it irreversible. And then accept that you don't fully know how yet. Accept that you'll have to figure it out in real time. Accept that the commitment is what will force the solutions. Because here's the final truth about irreversible decisions. They reveal who you actually are. When you have escape routes, you never know if you're truly committed. You're always wondering if you'd actually follow through when it gets hard. But when you burn the bridges, you find out. You discover capabilities you didn't know you had. You find solutions you wouldn't have found if retreat was still an option. You become the person the commitment demands. Musk didn't know he could build a rocket company when he started SpaceX. But the irreversible commitment forced him to become someone who could. Tesla didn't know they could scale production when they committed to the Model 3 timelines. But the commitment forced them to figure it out. The person you need to become to fulfill your commitment doesn't exist yet. That person emerges through the process of fulfilling it. But only if the commitment is real. Only if it's irreversible. So make it real. Take the biggest goal you have. The one that scares you because you don't know how to achieve it. And commit to it. Publicly. Irreversibly. With a timeline that creates urgency. And then trust that the commitment will force the solutions. Because your brain solves what it has no choice but to solve. And when you remove the option to retreat, your brain stops asking whether and starts solving how. That's how someone who thinks like Elon Musk turns impossible commitments into inevitable outcomes. Not through certainty. Through commitment. Not through having all the answers. Through burning the bridges, so the only option is finding the answers. Not through waiting to be ready. Through committing before ready exists and becoming ready because there's no alternative. This is it. This is the final piece. You've learned to think clearly, to calculate risk, to operate in public, to generate conviction, to iterate rapidly, to reverse engineer impossible, to normalize pressure, to detach from ego, to reframe failure. And now, you commit. You make the decision irreversible. You announce it publicly. You burn the bridges. And then you wake up tomorrow with one question. How do I make this real? Not whether. How? And you keep asking that question every day until the commitment is fulfilled. That's how Elon Musk has built multiple billion-dollar companies. That's how he's achieved things the entire world said were impossible. Not through certainty. Through commitment. And now it's your turn. Make the commitment. Burn the bridges. Remove the escape routes. And then solve what you have no choice but to solve. Because that's where everything you've learned becomes real. That's where the mindset becomes the outcome. That's where you stop being someone who's learning to think like Musk and become someone who builds like him. So go, commit, and then figure it out. Because you already have everything you need. You just needed permission to bet on yourself without knowing how it ends. So here's what you know now. Elon Musk didn't get here because he felt ready. He got here because he refused to let his feelings decide. He calculated the mission. He worked backward from impossible. He committed before he was certain. And when everything exploded, he called it data and built again. That's not superhuman. That's a decision you can make right now. You don't need permission. You don't need certainty. You don't even need confidence. You need a mission that matters more than your comfort. You need to think in first principles, move in public, and iterate faster than your doubts can catch you. Because the world doesn't reward the people who wait to feel ready. It rewards the people who start anyway, who fail in public, learn in real time, and refuse to stop building. You've spent enough time preparing, enough time doubting, enough time asking if you're good enough. Stop asking. Start building. The mission is waiting, and you already know what to do. Now go.